So the next, the pituitary gland, is the master control gland, because the pituitary gland influences a lot of different glands in the body. The medical terminology for pituitary gland is hypophysis. There's no way around it. You need to know that hypophysis means pituitary. Okay, there are two major lobes of the pituitary gland. The posterior lobe towards the back, posterior means the back, and anterior means the front. Okay, and the posterior pituitary is also known as neurohypophysis. Neuro means nerves. It's called neurohypophysis because it is directly connected to the hypothalamus. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. And then it is made up of pituocytes. Pituocytes are specialized cells that assist in storage and release of hormones. Okay, and these hormones are called neurohypophyseal hormones. Okay, so pituocyte assists in store neurohypophyseal hormones. The second lobe, that is the anterior pituitary lobe, is known as the adenohypophysis. Adeno means gland. Okay, and hypophysis means pituitary. The anterior pituitary gland is a true glandular tissue because this gland produces its own hormones under the influence of the hypothalamus. Okay, whereas the posterior pituitary merely stores and releases certain hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. Now, right over here you see the hypothalamus, and this over here is the pituitary gland. This bone surrounding the pituitary gland is sella turcica. So if you remember, sella turcica. Sella turcica is the region on the base of the skull where the pituitary gland sits. And then this region over here is known as the infundibulum. The infundibulum. So the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland by the stalk-like structure known as the infundibulum. Okay. So let's look at the posterior pituitary gland. Now, before we move on, I would like to remind you that the hypothalamus is located in the third ventricle, right below the thalamus, and it is directly connected to the posterior pituitary lobe. Now, if you observe the posterior lobe, it is actually a downgrowth of the brain. So it's a downgrowth of the hypothalamus. It is not a standalone gland. But it stores hormones, and that's why we call it a posterior pituitary gland. Okay. So another name for the posterior pituitary is the neurohypophysis. It is called the neurohypophysis because it is a part of the brain, and all these blue and green lines you see are neural connections that extend down from the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary gland. Let's also revise the functions of the hypothalamus. Now, if you remember, the hypothalamus is a very important part of the brain. It is very important in the visceral reflexes of the body. So the hypothalamus is the center for regulation of the temperature of the body. It controls blood sugar levels, so it controls appetite and satiety. It also controls osmoregulation, meaning it regulates the fluids and ions and salts in the body. It also is an activity for modulates the activity for the cardiovascular reflexes. Okay, so we also use hypothalamus. So hypothalamus controls swallowing, vomiting, defecation, etc. So it's a major region of the brain. So in a sense, the hypothalamus has the highest control over the autonomic and visceral reflexes of the body. It plays a major role in homeostasis. Apart from controlling different parts of the body and homeostasis in the body, the hypothalamus plays a major role in secretion of two hormones. The first one is oxytocin. The second one is antidiuretic hormones, so two hormones. Before we move on, I would like to remind you of two important terminologies that you have studied in nervous system anatomy, in neuroanatomy. The first term is nuclei that you see over here, nuclei, and the other term is tract. Okay. Now in neuroanatomy, cluster of neurons in the central nervous system. So cluster of neurons in the central nervous system is called nucleus, or nuclei is the plural form. And tracts are basically the bundles of axons extending from the cell body. So tracts are bundles of axons, and nuclei is a cluster of neurons. So you can see over here, you see nuclei in the hypothalamus, which contain cluster of neurons in the central nervous system. Okay. So let's revisit the relationship between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland. Now, how are they anatomically related? Now, the hypothalamus is linked to the posterior pituitary lobe with the help of nerve fiber tracts and capillaries. Capillaries, known as the pituitary portal system. So these are the two things that connect the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary lobe. So let me remind you that the posterior pituitary lobe is actually a downgrowth of the brain, okay? And the neural connection between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary is known as this neural connection between the two is known as the hypothalamic. It's properly hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. Let me remind you, tract is a bundle of axons in the central nervous system, which extend from the cell body, which are actually clustered in a region known as nuclei. So in a sense, the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract is formed by neurons in the nuclei of the hypothalamus. Now, the two most important nuclei that we're going to look at is the paraventricular nuclei and the supraoptic nucleus. Now, the paraventricular nucleus secretes oxytocin, and the supraoptic nucleus secretes antidiuretic hormone. Once the nuclei in the hypothalamus produce these hormones, they are basically stored in specialized cells in the posterior pituitary gland. And these specialized cells are known as pituicytes. The pituicytes basically assist in storage and release of antidiuretic or antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. When the hypothalamus sends nerve impulses to these pituicytes over here, they release the hormones into the bloodstream. Okay, so these hormones are chemicals that are always released into the bloodstream, and that's why these are called endocrine hormones. On the anterior portion, we have the anterior pituitary gland. And if you remember, the anterior pituitary lobe is called the adenohypophysis, because adeno means gland, hypophysis means pituitary. And this is called a true gland because it is made up of glandular tissue. Okay, the anterior lobe is actually an outpocketing of the oral mucosa, so it originates from the oral mucosa. The anterior lobe is not directly connected to the hypothalamus. The only way the anterior lobe is connected to the hypothalamus is with the help of something called as a portal system, and this is called the hypophyseal portal system. Now, a portal system, I know these are a lot of complicated words over here, but it's very important that you understand these terminology. A portal system is a consecutive two capillary bed. So it's a two consecutive capillary bed which is connected by a portal vein. Okay, two capillaries, and these capillaries are highly fenestrated. Fenestrations meaning they have pores, bigger holes. So when we look at the cardiovascular system, we'll see different types of pores in the capillaries, and fenestration is a big pore through which substances can easily pass through. And it makes sense that this portal system has pores just so it can allow easy passage and diffusion of hormones into the bloodstream to be transported to different parts of the body. Okay, so the hypophyseal portal system contains a primary capillary plexus, a hypophyseal portal vein, and a secondary capillary plexus. Now, you can see the word plexus over here. Plexus basically means a network of nerves or blood vessels in the body. We can call it a plexus. You might have come across these terms in neuroanatomy as well. All right. So the hypophyseal portal system is the portal system that acts as a connection between the anterior pituitary lobe and the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is not physically directly connected to the hypothalamus. Okay, now what's the role of hypothalamus over here? Why does it need to be connected to the anterior lobe at all? That's because it carries a whole bunch of releasing and inhibiting hormones. Now, if you remember, I told you that the hypothalamus is like a master control gland. It controls a lot of different things in the body to maintain homeostasis, thirst, fluids, osmoregulation, so many different things. Okay, so Anyway, so the hypothalamus releases a lot of releasing and inhibiting hormones to the anterior pituitary gland. And this allows the hypothalamus to regulate the anterior pituitary lobe. Okay, now what does these releasing and inhibiting hormone mean? Now just think of the word and the meaning. Releasing is something that helps or prompts the release of something else. Okay, so a releasing hormone is a hormone that triggers the release of another hormone. For example, growth hormone is a hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, but the thyroid hormone, not thyroid hormone, the sorry about that. The hypothalamus secretes growth hormone, releasing hormone, that in turn triggers the release of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. Okay, so growth hormone releasing hormone is synthesized by the hypothalamus. When the signal reaches the anterior pituitary, it releases the growth hormone. Alright, so this picture gives you an overview of the hypothalamus and the location of the anterior pituitary lobe, and this over here is the posterior pituitary lobe. You can see this region is known as the infundibulum, which is the stalk in between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And this posterior lobe is connected directly with the help of hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. And this area is just a storage area for the hypothalamic hormones, oxytocin and ADH. The anterior lobe, on the other hand, is a glandular tissue. So you can see the glandular cuboidal epithelium in the adenohypophysis. Okay, the only way the hypothalamus is connected to the anterior pituitary is with the help of portal system. And this over here, these capillaries, the first capillaries that extend out of the hypothalamus connecting to the adenohypophysis is called the primary capillary plexus. The primary capillary plexus carries releasing and inhibitory hormone from the hypothalamus to this middle region known as the hypophyseal portal wing. Okay. Now, from the hypophyseal portal wing, these inhibitory and releasing hormones are carried to the secondary plexus that are embedded in the glandular tissue. Once these releasing and inhibitory hormones reach the adenohypophysis, the anterior pituitary gland can release or inhibit the secretion of certain hormones. Finally, the glandular tissue in the anterior lobe can release these hormones directly into the bloodstream. So finally, no matter which hormone we're talking about, it will be released into the bloodstream and we transport it to the different parts of the body, and they go on to search for their own target cells. Okay, stop. Okay, let me quickly remind you of a few terms. First one, releasing hormone. Releasing hormones stimulate or trigger the release of another hormone. Okay, stimulating hormone that you see over here, a stimulating hormone stimulates the release of hormone from another gland or another chemical from, it just stimulates the release of something or triggers the release of something. Okay, and then you have inhibitory hormone. Inhibitory hormone inhibits the release of something or inhibits a process. Inhibition means to stop. Okay, and another new term that we'll look at is called a tropic hormone. Tropic hormones are hormones that target other endocrine glands. Okay, endocrine glands or tissues. So tropic hormones act upon other endocrine tissue or endocrine glands in the body. All right, so keep this in the back of your mind. Now, there are 6 different hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary lobe, and the 6 different hormones are listed over here. Sorry about that. Okay, so the anterior pituitary lobe produces 4 tropic hormones. 4 tropic hormones. The first tropic hormone is thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. That's right over here. The thyroid stimulating hormone, as the name suggests, it stimulates the thyroid gland. Okay, and then you have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, number 2, which is also known as ACTH. The adrenocorticotropic hormone act upon the adrenal cortex in the adrenal glands. Okay, so they stimulate the release of hormones from the adrenal glands. And the third hormone is follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the maturation of follicles in the gonads, that is the testes and the ovary. The fourth tropic hormone is the luteinizing hormone, or LH. Luteinizing hormone also act upon the ovary on testes. Okay, so the anterior pituitary lobe secretes 4 tropic hormones. Okay, and what are tropic hormones? Tropic hormones act upon other endocrine glands or tissues. In addition to the tropic hormones, the anterior pituitary gland secretes growth hormone and prolactin. Now, these 2 hormones are not tropic hormones, meaning they don't act upon other endocrine glands or tissues in the body. Growth hormone helps in growth, okay, and the what is it called? The prolactin, which is a hormone that helps in milk production in the mammary glands. Okay. All right, so now you might be wondering what this picture is all about. So what you're looking at is the histology of the anterior pituitary gland. You don't have to know too much about this just yet, but if we get time to look at this again in lab, you might need to know this later. But for now, don't worry about it. Be familiar with the type of hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary lobe. All right, so what you're looking at here is the acidophiles, and these are called basophiles. You can see the dark pink ones, acidophiles, they are due to the pigmentation and the acidic dyes used to stain them. Okay, and the basophiles or basophils are stained with the help of basic dyes, and that's why they look light pink, whereas the acidophils look dark pink. And chromophores are the cells that have no hormonal content at all. So they can be fatty tissue or any other tissue around that do not produce hormone. Okay. All right, so a quick revision of different hormones produced by the anterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary secretes 4 tropic hormones. The first tropic hormone is, well, what we looked at is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the tropic hormone. And then the adrenocorticotropic hormone that acts upon the adrenal cortex of the adrenal gland. And then we have the follicle stimulating hormone that acts upon the gonads, luteinizing hormone that also acts upon the gonads. 2 other hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary is human growth hormone. This is non-tropic. And then we have prolactin, also non-tropic. Okay, now this hormone right over here is melanocyte stimulating hormone. Don't worry too much about this hormone, but just understand that this is an important hormone that allows the production or stimulates the production of melanocytes in the skin. And melanocyte helps in producing melanin, which gives you the skin color, so yellowish or brown or dark brown color, whatever it is. So melanocytes secrete melanin, and they're very important in protection from UV rays and also the control of appetite, actually. And where is this secreted? Melanocyte stimulating hormone is secreted specifically by the intermediate pituitary region. Okay, so the region in between the 2 lobes is called the intermediate pituitary region, and that's where melanocyte stimulating hormone is secreted. That's all you need to know.